After that sneak attack of heavy rains and flooding last week, many New Orleanians woke up to catch basins full of standing water. Even after Hurricane Barry came and went, some of those storm drains remained clogged.
It was filled to the absolute brim, compacted over what looked to me to be a very long time of mud, leaves, and a ton of roots.
Residents like Brad Oster took it upon themselves to clear catch basins, above and below ground, but in many cases, the water still has not receded. This despite assurances from Sewerage and Water Board Director Ghassan Korban that the major pumping infrastructure is working at near maximum capacity.
I feel very confident that we're going to continue that optimum level of operation.
That has shifted the focus to the front end of the drainage system, the city's 72,000 catch basins and the small pipes that carry water from the street to water mains and canals.
A lot of these catch basins are clogged, and we doing our job, the city's not doing their job.
Joe Otilio works for a private catch basin cleaning company, Fastbender Sewer and Drain. Even though catch basins are the city's responsibility, many businesses and property owners hire private companies like Fastbender for more regular cleaning.
We have clients all up and down, uptown, downtown, all over.
The company has been in demand since Wednesday's floods, and here's what workers are finding.
Some of them are clogged, some of them might be broken, you know, and if it's broken, there might be mud, you know, sand, whatever it may be the case, you know.
How much of a factor do you think that is in New Orleans?
Oh, a big factor, because if the pipes were good, obviously we wouldn't have this problem. It would drain.
The city has an interactive map of all catch basins, and while most are colored blue, marked as cleaned, that cleaning in many cases hasn't been done since 2017. Many people posted on social media alerting us to areas that still have water from last week. We've seen catch basins blocked above the surface. We've seen catch basins blocked below the surface. Here's a catch basin blocked by the surface itself, blocked by a newly paved street in Lakeview. With the city's pumps at near optimal capacity, the experts say the cause is obvious.
If they're saying the pumps are working and we still having water here, there's a problem somewhere between here and the pumps.
While not a Sewerage and Water Board responsibility, the catch basins and smaller lateral pipes are still a city responsibility, handled by the Department of Public Works. Mike Pearlstein, Eyewitness News.
The city's Public Works Committee is scheduled to meet tomorrow to discuss the city's response to the storms last week, and we will follow that catch basin issue very closely at that meeting.